Welcome everyone to Using Your Influence for Social Change. Today we are going to be talking about voting and elections. My name is Paola Mendez and I am the founder of the Blogger Union, Black Lives Matter at the Blogger Union. The Blogger Union leadership stands in solidarity with the Black community in this historic push for justice. As influencers, we have hundreds, thousands, and sometimes millions of people who go to us for advice. We have a unique opportunity to make a real difference by inspiring and educating our readers to engage and start advocating for change. Tonight's webinar is part of a series to help educate and empower individuals from the casual social media user to the influencer. Our goal is to provide the tools to educate ourselves and others on various issues that need to be examined through an anti-racism lens. If you missed our first webinar, where we discussed scrutinizing where we have privilege, you can watch it on the Blogger Union YouTube channel. This and future webinars will also be saved there. Now, let's get started and introduce our speakers for tonight. Welcome, Melba.
Hello.
Hi. Melba Pearson is a candidate for Miami-Dade State Attorney. She is an attorney specializing in civil rights and criminal law with an emphasis on policy. Before launching her consulting firm, MVP Law, she spent 3 years as deputy director of the ACLU of Florida, where she worked to change police practices, expand voting rights, and reform the criminal justice system. Previously, Ms. Pearson was an assistant state attorney in Miami-Dade County for 16 years. Hi, Melba. How are you doing today? We're so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me, Paola. And hey, everyone. Great to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. So before we get started, would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I was born and raised in New York, came down here in 1997 to work at the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office. And I did that for a year, left, and then was working in the special events and marketing and public relations field. And so I did that for about 5 years. And then I returned to the practice of law in 2002, where I continuously remained until this day. And as mentioned, I was a prosecutor here in Miami-Dade County, where I worked on everything from auto theft to double homicides. I supervised and also trained and hired prosecutors to work at the office. During that time, I was president of the National Black Prosecutors Association. So I did that for 2 terms, and that was pretty awesome because I got the opportunity to really learn about criminal justice reform and travel around the country to see what best practices were. And that was also around the same time that I started my blog, The Resident Legal Diva.
Right.
Yeah, and unfortunately the campaign trail has laid complete waste to being able to write in a creative manner. But I hope to get back to that after the election is over. But that was always sort of like my stress release, as well as my opportunity to be able to really explain some of the legal concepts that were being floated out into the atmosphere. So for instance, when I started writing, it was right around the time of the Michael Brown case, where he died in St. Louis as a result of police action and police excessive use of force. And so there was a lot of discussion around the grand jury and the process, and there were a lot of misconceptions floating around. So I started to use my blog as a way to, use my voice to explain some of the things that people were dealing with and what was really happening behind the scenes so that people can have a better grasp on these concepts. So yeah, so that's it. And then I was deputy director, as mentioned, for the ACLU of Florida, where I continued to write about criminal justice issues, this time actually getting paid for it, which was awesome, which is always the goal, right?
Absolutely.
And I learned to actually pitch, which was a whole other skill set. And now I'm on the campaign trail. So I'm running to bring criminal justice reform to Miami-Dade County. I would be making history as the first African-American woman to hold this position in Miami's history, as well as being the second in the state of Florida and the first Caribbean-American in Florida history. So the election's August 18th. So, definitely check me out. I'm at Melba for Miami on all socials, and, hit me up, donate if you can. And, looking forward to the rest of the discussion. had to, of course, get that out the way, you know.
All right. Well, that's amazing. And we're so excited to have you here. Obviously, I'm Team Melba, and I will definitely be voting for you. So we're really excited to have you here today. Let me also introduce our co-moderator, Luisa Santos. Luisa Santos is a candidate for Miami-Dade School Board. She graduated from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. with a minor in education. Following graduation, Luisa returned home to Miami to launch Lulu's Ice Cream, where she employed local students and mentored many of them. She also allowed community organizations to use her storefront for meetings and events. As founder and CEO, she has worked tirelessly to ensure Lulu's success and to contribute to the community of Miami. Welcome, Luisa.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
We are so excited to have you co-moderate this panel with us. Thank you. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself before we get started?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, thank you for having me. I am so excited to be speaking to this group and really making sure that we bring in more and more people into the mix of getting civically engaged at all levels. Doesn't have to be for me or Melba, but I hope it is. Really to get informed on the ways that we can all do our part. So I was born in Colombia, came to the US when I was 8 years old, and we landed here in South Dade. And really my mom left everything she knew in Colombia for the opportunity that public education was going to provide to my sister and I here. And she was right. Our schools poured into me so that by high school, I was running the town. I thought I was going to start a mentoring program district-wide. And when I went to register with our district, I learned that I was an undocumented student. And that closed some doors at the time. Of course, this was before DREAM Act, before DACA, but I was able to start my education at Miami-Dade College and eventually, like you said, transferred to Georgetown University. And while I was in DC, I worked in two vastly different resourced communities. One as an assistant fourth grade teacher at a very high performing school. And then for 3 years, I ran an after school literacy program at a vastly under-resourced school. And this kind of equity minded drive started to build within me that built upon what I had experienced, of course, as a student, but then seeing how many different communities were being serviced differently. So I spent some time at the Federal Department of Education, came back home. Like you said, the twist in my story is that I started an ice cream company of all things, but I really, as an educator, made sure that first and foremost, I had this mission to work with young people and rethink what employers can do for young people. So we provide financial literacy training, CAP advising, which is college assistance, help, and I've had 3 students already who are first generation going to Georgetown as well. So very proud of the work we did there. And 3 years ago, I started getting re-engaged with education, started attending school board meetings, and I am running in this race like Melba, hoping to be the first of some things, right? First former Dreamer, first Latina in this specific seat in a district that's 92% students of color and has never been represented by a representative of color. So I'm very excited to be able to be the change that I want to see. And I really look at myself as the vessel through which this equity-minded movement for education is moving. So excited to have this conversation tonight.
Well, thank you so much. I know it's a really hectic time right now. You guys are on the campaign trail, so I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us and just educate us in terms of voting and elections. So let's get started with the most important question, which is, why is it important to vote? Melba.
Yeah, why is it important to vote? So as we explore all of the activism that everyone has been doing around the country, especially in the wake of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade and Elijah McCain and so many people that have lost their lives to violence, you know, we're in the street, we're protesting, we're posting on social media. All of that is great, but if you don't vote, we'll never see the change that we want to see, right? Because at the end of the day, the way for these policies to get passed, to see the changes with regards to how police are trained, or whether or not you want to defund the police, or how you want to see the education system improve so that there's equal outcomes for all people, including people of color, as well as people of privilege, as well as people who are poor, right? The only way we can do that is by electing leaders who are aligned with our values and believe in those things. So because when we start firing those folks who don't have our best interest at heart, that's when we'll start to see a shift. And at the end of the day, public officials have to be responsive to their electorate, or they're not going to keep their jobs, right? And if they're seeing that, listen, everybody wants this particular thing, and they see, like, you know, the numbers, the polling, if they want to keep their jobs, they're going to start advocating for it, or risk getting swept out of office, as we have seen across the country with progressive challengers challenging folks who have held seats for 20, 30 years, but were no longer delivering for their communities. So that's why it's so important to get engaged. And then the last piece, and then, you know, obviously I'll turn it over to Louisa, is just that, you know, there's a huge sacrifice involved in being a candidate, and it's not something I ever really realized until I did it, right? So part of this whole journey, I'm like pulling back the curtains on stuff that people just don't really know. But it takes a lot to run for office, between money and time, and giving up your personal life, and giving up your privacy, and, you know, having people say things about you that isn't true, and all of that. So, you know, when you have progressive people who put themselves out there, who don't have generational wealth, who don't have Bloomberg money, who don't have, you know, fixers are going to come, like, you know, polish up their past to make them look like something they're not. You know, progressive candidates really put a lot on the line. So it's really important to support them, so that more progressive candidates will come forward, because they can see a path to victory.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, and I'm moderating, so I'm asking you questions tonight as well.
Oh!
I'll drop my 2 cents in there. And I will say, like you said, you know, voting is really, I always tell people, we all have to find our lane, right, to be active. But everyone's minimum, right, is voting, if you have the privilege to be a citizen, and it is our duty, right, to create that change. And then there are other people who will step into elected leadership as another lane. And that's where you and I find ourselves in this moment, in how we can bring about that change we want to see. But voting is the minimum we need for everyone to be able to do their job. So the next question is, if you have not been active in past elections, right? Many people haven't, and maybe are catalyzed in this moment too. How do you get started?
For me, it's about starting at home, right? Starting with the organizations you belong to. So let's say you are part of the Young Democrats, right? Or something like that. That could be a place to start, to kind of look on the website, look on the Facebook page to see who's running in each race, and taking a look at that. If you're, let's say, you subscribe to Move On or to Color of Change, right? They do a lot of different electoral work in different states. So you can go to their website and take a look at who's running and who they're supporting. Also, you can get your sample ballot, right? So if you go on, you know, when you register to vote, you can just opt in for emails, and usually you get an email saying, hey, if you want to take a look at your sample ballot, click here. And so I do that all the time, because sometimes there's races that I may not be necessarily paying attention to, but pop up on the ballot. So I like to look at that first, and then go online and start kind of Googling and looking to see, you know, what the people's positions are, not just necessarily because of the party, but also just to know who you are as a person. Because don't assume that someone has a D before or after their name and they're necessarily aligned with your values, because they could be, you know, what we call back in the day Dixiecrats, right? Like, you're a Democrat, but you're actually really racist. So, you know, those are the things that you kind of have to look out for, and kind of make sure you're doing a deeper dive into the person's history. And again, Google is a gift. Google will tell you everything you need to know, and some of what you never wanted to know.
So just tell us how we do some of that research for incumbents, right? People who have held seats. How do we find what they stand for and what they've done?
So a couple ways. For instance, the ACLU, as well as the League of Women Voters, tends to do report cards around certain races. Maybe not every single race. So for instance, they probably won't do report cards around a school board race. It would be nice if they did, but sometimes they focus on like governor, mayor, some of like the bigger seats, right? So you can take a look at the organizations like that, like NAACP. They do some scorecards, so you can look at that. Also, when it comes to the incumbent, you start off number one with their website, see what they're bragging about, right? And if what they're bragging about aligns with your values, okay, great. If they are bragging about something that you're like, but that's not okay, then you already start to see that maybe this is not the right candidate for me and I need to explore what the challenger is doing. And also you can go, and depending on the seat, I'm trying to think, now I can't remember the website, but there's a website you can go to for congressional and Senate races where you can basically take a look at an incumbent's voting record. So you can see what they voted for, how many times they voted, because sometimes you'll see in articles, they'll be like, oh, well, this particular senator missed half the votes, this past session or whatever. So that's a way to find out what their track record is and some of the bills that they co-sponsored, so you can see if they're aligned to your values. I'm just going to keep trying to think on that website, and if I can remember it, I'll drop it in the comments.
Yeah, and there's Vote Smart, right? That's one of the websites. I don't know if that's the one you're referring to. And also some history on who's given to them financially, right? So the FEC, and then of course there's social media, like you said, kind of along with that website, is important too. And what races do we all that are here today need to know about? What are the elections that are taking place immediately that we should know are coming up and participate in?
Oh my gosh. So first off, August 18th, that is the primaries. Okay. So, and I'm going to try to explain it because without getting too in the weeds. But anyway, we've got the August elections and we've got the November 3rd election. So August is the primary. And in August, we've got the mayor's race. We've got my race, Melba Pearson for state attorney, Melba for Miami. We've got a number of judges on the ballot. I want to say there's about 7 or 8 judicial races. There's a number of school board races, as well as, so Louisa for school board, yes. And also there is county commission seats that are up for election as well. So it's a packed ballot, right? Which is why I really suggest you take a look at the sample ballot to give yourself time to research, so you're not like at the last minute like, okay, I'll just pick whoever, right? And then also, just as a reminder, with all of the COVID numbers now really spiking and being out of control, sign up to vote by mail. I think the site is votefromhome.miami, and you can go on. Okay, yeah, I'm seeing a comment, so I'm going to address that in a second. But yeah, so you can go on that website to be able to request your vote by mail ballot. And then that way, you have it's like an open book test. It comes to your house, and then you can legit like Google folks and then, fill out whichever, then keep Googling and keep filling out. So that's what's on the ballot for August. And then in November, obviously we have the presidential, we have a number of congressional seats. We have any runoffs if anybody in the primary election wasn't a clear winner, that race will roll over to November. I don't think we have any U.S. Senate seats. We probably are going to have some state Senate seats as well as state House seats that'll be up. So that's basically what the breakdown is.
Right. And Rochelle, you asked about those positions being on the November ballot. We should clarify, some of these are primaries, so there will be 2 people who end up, the 2 top vote getters. If someone doesn't get 51% of the vote, will move on to the November election. So there will be certain races where you will see the same kind of position, both in August and in November. And I guess you could address Linda's question around how we find information on judges, since those are technically nonpartisan seats, and it's hard.
Yeah, so a couple different ways. First off, definitely go to both candidates' websites so you can get a general sense of who they are. Social media is going to be harder for judges because they really can't post much of anything because of the ethical rules. They're just not allowed to really talk about, well, if this case comes before me, this is how I'm going to rule, right? That's really problematic, and you can get in a lot of trouble for that. So you start with their websites, and then you reach out to attorney friends, right? And so feel free to reach out to me, inbox me on Facebook or on the gram or whatever. And if you want to know, hey, what's your thought on this particular race, I'm more than happy to list off the people that I support, and I can give brief reasons as to why. A lot of attorneys do the same. So if you have other attorneys in your life, they tend to be very engaged around this. So that's another way to find out. And then also, I know that, I'm trying to think, the Dade County Bar Association and sometimes other voluntary bar associations is what they called, they will do a survey of their members and then release that information on their website and say, all right, our members in this particular judicial race favor this judge over this other judge, right? Or this other candidate. So that is another way to get information.
Okay. And that's wonderful. And of course, town halls are being mentioned. Absolutely. Watch any town hall you can get. It's the best way to contrast candidates at once and to ask your questions, right? Your specific questions. And the last part of this very long multi-part question is, what are some of these specific elected positions that we should know because they have a direct influence on our lives?
I mean, all of them do, right? But I always want to lift up, people sleep on the August primary. They're like, oh no, the only one that really matters is November, the presidential, whatever. Listen, the president does what he does in DC. It does have an effect on our life, no question. But the people who for legit touch you on a day-to-day basis is your mayor, is your county commission, right? So for instance, going back to the protest that we've been talking about, the big debate now is whether or not we're going to have civilian oversight of the police, which is something that many activists have been asking for. Well, it passed yesterday, I think, with 8-5 votes, 8 in favor and 5 against, right? So these are folks who, if the vote had gone slightly differently, we may not have civilian oversight, right? There's still a possibility that the mayor may veto that. So if the mayor vetoes it, then we will not have civilian oversight of the police here in Miami-Dade County. And so that's why I say the mayor is super important, because he can stop things right in its tracks, right? And your county commission's important because if they're not aligned with your values, you've got 5 commissioners who don't think it's necessary for the regular everyday people to be able to have a say in how policing should be done in this county, right? So you got to think about that. And then when you come to like races like the school board, listen, do you want more police officers in schools or less?
Exactly.
What do you want your school system to look like? And you have to vote for school board members who share your vision. If you don't, then you're just going to be served whatever it is you get, and that's not always reflective of what we want.
And of course, state attorney, do you want, police officers who do horrible things, and it happens sometimes, to be held accountable? Well, you need to vote, right? That affects your life too. Amazing. Okay, I'll pass it over to Paola for the next question.
Okay, so Luisa, Melba, you've been having Facebook Lives on a regular basis, which I think is amazing. What can influencers or just any person who has a social media outlet do to amplify a candidate that they support?
Couple different things. So what I've been experiencing, which has been amazing, is like, my Instagram has been on fire. My campaign Instagram is like insane. Like within 1 week, I got nearly 1,000 new followers organically, right? So it was just one of those things. I looked at my app and I was like, okay, welcome on board. So one thing that you can do very simply is follow, right? Follow those candidates so that you're continuing to read and learn and be able to educate yourself about their platforms. The second thing you can do is amplify their message. So what I've been seeing on my Instagram is all of these like amazing creatives are like, Googling stuff about me and creating their own graphics and then sharing that content and saying, this is why I support Melba Pearson, or this is the role and the power of a state attorney. And y'all remember, these are the key dates. And this is the deadline to request your vote by mail ballot. This is the deadline to register to vote. This is actual election day. So sharing all of that information. So definitely, following candidates, then engaging with their campaign by sharing their messages, especially on Facebook. Don't just like the post, comment and reshare, because that improves the algorithms, which means that candidate's information will appear higher in everyone's feeds. So that's another way to keep that traction going. Also reaching out to the candidate, just DMing them and being like, I want to volunteer, I want to help. How can I use my platform to help you? I've gotten a spike of, folks reaching out to, be on Zooms like this, or to be on podcasts, or they want to interview me for their blog and they want to write a piece about me, So those are some of the things you can do to help your candidate by using your platform to, educate your readers, your listeners, the folks that you engage with, your followers, about this candidate.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, everyone who's running, every candidate has a vested interest in everyone being informed, period, not just in what we stand for and why we're running, but we really want everyone to be informed. And influencers, bloggers, you all have an audience, and that's very helpful in accomplishing our mission. So another question we have for you, it's a little bit on another topic, but what inspired you to become involved in politics? And what does a state attorney do?
Sure. So what inspired me to become involved? I think I was just born into politics, right? And not from the standpoint of my parents were politicians and I followed in their footsteps. Listen, I'm a Black woman in America. I've got to care about politics, right? Because politics directly influences whether or not my family members are safe. It influences whether or not I'm able to live or die. It's just that simple for me. It's about survival. So I never felt that I had the luxury of, sticking my head in the sand and not being engaged, because, when it comes to issues of police brutality, when it comes to issues of gentrification, when it comes to issues of job creation, right? That all directly impacts the kind of community that I want to live in and the kind of country and world that I want to see. So I've always been involved. I've always been fascinated more by history. So really looking at past elections and sort of, for instance, always constantly getting to debates about like the Southern strategy under then candidate Nixon, and how that was the beginning of that coded language of law and order and, all of these different phraseologies that was intended to stoke fear and create a certain outcome, right? So I always loved reading about that, because I always feel that, if we don't know our past, we're doomed to repeat it, right? And people, the strategies are the same. They just call it something different. They polish it up a bit, but it's the same kind of strategies that just keep getting repeated over and over again. So that's kind of how I got involved in politics generally. And as an attorney, just having that legal knowledge, you engage on a different level, again, just because you have this knowledge. And then when I was working for the ACLU, obviously that's a whole other level, because again, speaking out against injustice, fighting for voting rights, all of that is just part of the job, and it's just part of what I love to do. I decided to run for this office because of a number of different injustices that I saw, including what was the Darren Rainey case. I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with this. This was an African-American man who was in custody in prison here in Miami-Dade County, and he was left to die in a scalding hot shower for 2 hours. The temperature of the shower went between 160 and 180 degrees, and my opponent refused to file charges in that case, to hold the 4 corrections officers accountable for leaving him to die in that manner. So that just bothered me, because I was like, the facts are there. Like, yeah, it was going to be a challenging case, no doubt, but this was a key opportunity to be able to, number one, bring closure to Mr. Rainey's family, but also number two, to let law enforcement know that, listen, we stand with you and support you when you're doing right, but if you're harming people and killing people, that's not okay. So there was that. And then there was another police officer who was violating women and girls in the Hialeah area. He violated 5 women and girls. And again, charges weren't filed against him. So that's what really inspired me to run, because I was just like, no, this is not the office that I worked for. This is not the standard that I'm used to. And I think it's just, leadership she's just out of touch. So that's what inspired me. And then to get to the final part of the question, which is, what does a state attorney do? Again, using the example of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of those cases, everybody started to realize the power of a prosecutor when they saw in the Ahmaud Arbery case, 3 prosecutors basically sat on the case and never filed charges against the 2 men who basically lynched Ahmaud Arbery as he was going for a jog. That's the power of a prosecutor, whether or not to bring charges, what level of charges to bring, what are the priorities going to be? So is it about, am I going to send lower level offenses to diversion, or am I just going to put people in jail and create other consequences that make them almost impossible to get back on the straight and narrow? Are you going to prioritize violent crime? Are you going to work with ICE and make sure that people get deported? Or are you going to try to find other ways for people who don't pose a risk to stay in the country? So there's so many different aspects that a prosecutor touches, even if you're not directly impacted by the criminal justice system. A lot of people think, oh, well, I don't commit crimes and nobody in my family gets arrested, so why should I care? Well, when it comes to the Ahmaud Arbery's, Breonna Taylor's, and George Floyd's of the world, you want to see justice. So the type of prosecutor you elect is what's going to determine what type of justice you're going to see in your community. So.
Absolutely. And similarly on school boards, right? Our school board, we have a member who voted in the middle of this climate against an item to basically evaluate our curriculum for anti-racism, and to know that exists, right, is definitely one of the many reasons that I'm excited to be running to change that. And we need a lot of that. So moving on to the next question, we know that a lot of people are feeling extremely overwhelmed with the amount of information that is out there that we're receiving, especially in this COVID world. We're constantly on screens and it's easy to get there. So can you provide suggestions on where we can find updated and factual information on elections and in general too?
The supervisor of elections is that's the source, right? That's legit the source, because the dates are going to be right, and that the resources that you need are there. Like if you need to update your address or change your party affiliation or whatever the case may be. So that's one option. I personally like vote.org because it's just easy. It's easy to remember. And again, you can find information about races across the country. So even if you're just focused on Miami because you live here, but you're like, oh yeah, I hear that there's a district attorney's race in Los Angeles. How can I learn more about it? You can go on vote.org and you can find out more information and get linked to other places. Also, I find the bigger organizations like your ACLU, again, your NAACP, Move On, Color of Change, League of Women Voters, Planned Parenthood to an extent, especially if it's something that affects reproductive rights, those bigger organizations always tend to have accurate information because, again, they have a bigger staff and they're able to really vet things as they come in the door to be able to make sure that their information is accurate.
Absolutely. And for those of you in Miami, a hyper-local one is definitely votemiami.org, which was launched relatively recently, but is hyper-local and also great. Are there any other social media accounts that you recommend we follow? Or hashtags for...
Yeah. I was going to think, I think there's like vote, your vote, your voice, voting ready. There's another one, and it's not coming to me right now, but I remember that they have a really robust social media presence. It could be the vote.org. They may have socials that are really engaging, so I would try that. but those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. But if you go to those websites, again, they'll direct you to their social media where you can follow and engage in that manner as well.
Yeah, and I think another recommendation that I have found helpful is using news apps versus social media, and setting timers too, just for our self-care, to not endlessly scroll and just feel doom and gloom all day long, and really stay focused. So, okay, so our next question, how do we create a dialogue with our elected officials and the candidates running for office? And do you have any suggestions on the best ways to contact or communicate with electeds and candidates?
Couple different ways. So when you're communicating with an elected official, number one, they all have email. So you just go on their page and you can email them that way. Also, you can call, especially if there's a bill coming up or a particular initiative that you want them to support. They may not answer the phone, but they have staffers, and their staffers will always take notes as to what people are calling about. And if there's a ton of people calling in favor of a particular bill or, wanting a certain course of action, they're going to bring that to the elected and say, look, this is really important to the people in your district. You really should consider voting yes, voting no, or taking further action. The other thing is to attend commission meetings if you have the time and the bandwidth, or attend town halls when different elected officials host them. Usually they host them, especially say if you're a legislator in Tallahassee. As soon as the session is over, they tend to have a bunch of town halls in their jurisdictions to be like, this is what happened this session, and this is what I tried to have passed, and this is some of the background of what was going on. So that's another way to engage. Definitely follow them on social media. And depending what's going on, you can at them, on Twitter or whatever, and just be like, at Governor DeSantis, like, where is the mask mandate, right? Like, we all, we see these numbers going up. What's being done to address this issue, right? So don't be afraid to do it, because again, they've got staffers that monitor social media, and they are tracking what seems to be the general feeling about a particular aspect. When it comes to candidates, I would say much the same thing. Again, reaching out to their campaign directly with questions you may have. Usually staffers will respond, but also it depends. I mean, don't hold it against them if someone doesn't get back to you right away, because not every candidate has a huge team behind them, right? Sometimes it's just them. So they do their best, especially in smaller races, they do their best to respond, but not always. They can't always do so. But again, attend those town halls and really hit them up on social media, because again, they're engaging and they're going to see it, and then they can address the issue that you may have that may be concerning you.
Absolutely. And I feel that when you ask a question on social media, it's a little bit harder for them to ignore. It's on it's in public view. So now let's talk about voter suppression. So we've been seeing in the primaries, like in Louisville, Kentucky, where one city of over 600,000 people had only one polling place. And we're seeing examples of voter disenfranchisement. So what information can we share, all of us, with our social media outlets in terms of what are your rights when it comes to voting?
There's a great website, and it's the, man, my memory today is just like, I think it's called Election Protection, right? I'm going to Google it right quick as I'm talking, but they do really great work around, watching elections. So in other words, if you have, it's 866 our vote. Hang on, I'm going to copy the link and post that in the chat. I actually volunteered for them in 2018 around the gubernatorial elections, and that was a really cool experience, because basically you sit in a war room, and as the calls come in, like, there's for instance, there's a polling place in a gated community, and they're like, oh, we want to see your photo ID to come in, even though that particular, we need to see your driver's license for you to come in, but that's not the requirement to be able to vote. You just have to bring photo ID, right? So they're adding another barrier for you to come in and be able to vote. So we got a number of calls like that. We were able to track it and then pass it on to the national organization so that they can have attorneys work on that. So I say all that to say that they're a great source of information, and they're also a great place to volunteer so that you can help fight back voter suppression, right? At the end of the day, if you are online, let's say the polling place is closed at 7. If you're in line at 6:59, you have to be allowed to vote. They cannot be like, okay, sorry. Listen, they can tell the person behind you that showed up at 7:01, but if you're on that line at 6:59, you have to be allowed to vote, right? Going a little bit deeper, I was part of the efforts to get Amendment 4 passed, which was the amendment that passed in 2018 that gave people with felony convictions who have completed the terms of their sentence the ability to vote again, right? So we're in the midst of a humongous lawsuit because, the governor didn't like that and basically had the legislature cut out parts of the amendment by passing a bill last session. So we're in the middle of a lawsuit around that. So that's one form of voter suppression, which is basically telling people that, listen, you have a criminal history, so now you can't vote. That's crazy, because you look at certain states like Vermont and like Maine and New Hampshire, you can still vote when you're in jail. You never lose your right to vote. So, it's just interesting how different states have different policies around it. And when you find, a lot of the states in the South, they look for a lot of different ways to make sure that people aren't able to vote. So the key thing is just to remember, number one, you are allowed to vote as long as you're in line before the cutoff. If there's an issue with regards to, oh, we can't find you in the system, you are allowed to cast a provisional ballot. And then after that, you can follow up and try to figure out what went wrong. So it's like you didn't have your voter registration card and they couldn't pull you up in the system. You have a certain amount of time, usually 7 days from the day of election, to go to the supervisor of election and fix the issue, right? So that's pretty important. And then as people vote by mail and sign up to vote by mail, there is another website, and it's checkmyballot.miami. And what you can do is track your ballot to make sure if there was an issue, let's say with your signature, right? Because you have to sign the bottom of your ballot, and maybe the signature they have on file is an old one, right? Because your signature kind of changes over time. Like your signature 10 years ago may not look exactly the same right now. So you have the ability to go on checkmyballot.miami and keep tracking your ballot. And if there's a problem, then you can proactively go to the supervisor of elections and fix it. So that way your vote can still count and they don't just toss it in the garbage and you voted for nothing. So that's some of the things that I think of when it comes to voting.
Oh, that's great. There's one specific example that happened in New York, that someone went to vote and they were an actual candidate that was running, and the ballot was missing a page, and it was the page that they were on.
Oh,
So
no.
how do you deal with that if you know that you have your sample ballot and you can tell there's something missing? Is there something that you can do right there at the poll?
Absolutely. So you report it to the head poll worker that's there, because there's always a supervisor on site at every location. And you can also, again, report that to the 866-hour vote to be like, listen, there's voting irregularities. So that way an investigation can be launched afterwards. Then also I would reach out to the supervisor of election for your area. It's by county. So whoever is a supervisor of election for your county. And again, same thing, be like, listen, my ballot was missing a page and, this needs to be corrected immediately. So.
Okay, great.
I would just add very quickly, take pictures, right? Document it, because if that candidate then has to go fight something, it would be helpful for them to have some evidence.
I thought it was illegal to take a picture of your ballot.
Is it? I'm talking about evidence in general, but
Yeah, I mean, I thought, If there was a problem, I don't see why it would be illegal because it's your ballot. And it would be for evidentiary purposes. But
Okay.
I don't know. I would
Maybe.
take the picture. I mean, it's my ballot. And, if you're taking a picture of somebody else's ballot, I could see the problem. But if it's, your answers, I don't see the issue, but I could be wrong.
Okay. No, great.
I'm not a specialist in election law. I will fully do that as my disclaimer. I'm criminal law all day and all night and civil rights. That's it. So.
So, but I think you addressed about voting by mail. So do you believe voting by mail and voting early would help deal with a lot of these issues that we're talking about of voter suppression?
Yeah, I think that first of all, what we're seeing in this current election is now the supervisor for elections are mailing out vote by mail ballot requests, not the actual ballot, but the request to all the registered voters, right? I think that's amazing. I look at states like Washington and Oregon, and there are a few states in the country that have I think it's Colorado as well, they have universal vote by mail. So just if you're registered to vote, you get a ballot to vote by mail. Period, end of story. And their voting rates are so much higher because it's more accessible to everyone. So you don't have a situation where it's oh, I don't have a ride to get to the polls, or the line is too long because my polling place got closed, or, I'm working all day and I can't really take the time off, So I think vote by mail really helps with that. And also early voting. There's always a controversy with regards to closing early voting polling sites and reducing the dates and the hours because of the simple fact that people work, right? And it disproportionately impacts people who are working class people who are not white collar workers that can just kind of take off. And if the line is long, they don't have to worry about, oh, I have to clock back in an hour. They can just stand in line and it's no big deal. So voting early is super important for that reason, as well as you see souls to the polls where the Sunday before early voting ends, you see a lot of the faith-based community, go together, they go to service and then they go to the polls together. And so they kind of ride together and all of that. So by taking that away, it is a form of voter suppression. So that's why I think early voting is so important. Voting by mail is so important, as well as, voting on election day, but having as many polling places as possible so you don't have the lines, which sometimes is a deterrent for people because they're listen, I don't have the time to be able to stay on that line for X amount, or physically, they can't stand in line physically for 2 hours or whatever the case may be. So.
Right, absolutely. Thank you.
And in this COVID world, right, because we all care about our health and safety, I know many of us candidates have been encouraging people to register to vote by mail to ensure that they can make their voice heard safely. All right, so if someone is interested in making a difference by running for office, what should they do?
First off, I would say volunteer for a campaign. And really volunteer. I don't mean just okay, I'm going to phone bang for one day and that's it. Really get in there and take on a volunteer role that you're responsible for on a day-to-day, on a weekly basis as much as you can. Because my dad always had a saying, come and see me and come and live with me are two different things, right? So you see kind of the general idea of what a campaign is, but when you're in it, you see the good, the bad, and the extremely ugly, right? And you need to know that. You need to know all of those components so that you can make an educated decision whether or not running for office is even for you, right? And if you run, how you're going to run. The perfect example I want to think of is my friend Jasmine Rogers Shaw. She's running for state rep. I forgot which district, but it's in Broward County. You guys can Google her. She's awesome, right? She decided she was going to run for office. And can I tell you, in 2 seconds, she had a team in place and all of that. Why was it so easy for her? Because she had been working on so many other campaigns as a volunteer or as a staffer for years. So she already knew, I need a finance director, I need a campaign manager, this is the person I'm going to have to help me with fundraising. And it was boom, boom, boom. So even though the process of running is still super stressful, she was prepared and she can pull her resources together in a very quick and effective manner. So that's the advantage of having, volunteered and all of that. I didn't do that. I didn't take my own advice on that. You know, and it is what it is. Like, listen, there's some mistakes that I made that if I had really shadowed another candidate, I would have known. Right. But then again, I was never really planning on running for office. So that's a separate issue. But anyway, you know, if you think this is a path you want to go down, I definitely encourage you to get involved and really learn about the nuts and bolts. And if you can, take a class. So there's a number of organizations, like in Florida, we have Ruth's List. We've got Emerge America, which is not in Florida, but it's in other states around the country. The Florida Democratic Party, and I'm sure the Republican Party as well, has classes on how to run for office, which includes, like, a lot of them just do a boot camp. So they'll talk about fundraising. They'll talk about, you know, creating a strategy. They'll talk about how to engage people with using marketing and communication. So you kind of get, and some of these classes are free. Some of them may be low cost, like $200 or something like that. But again, I think that's a really great investment because you'll learn the nuts and bolts of a campaign. They'll give you resources to walk away with for you to be able to fill out for yourself. And you also meet other like-minded people that are thinking about running for office who can be your support system, who can be folks you bounce ideas off of, who can kind of be your kitchen cabinet of folks that can either provide you with resources or, you know, like I'm very friendly with Monique Worrell, who's running for state attorney in Orlando. She's also an African-American woman looking to, you know, continue history because the person that is currently in office, Aramis Ayala, was the first Black state attorney in Florida history. So she was looking to kind of continue that streak. But we talk about issues that we have in common. I've referred to her vendors that I've used that I found to be effective, or she referred folks to me. So it became like a collaborative effort because, listen, at the end of the day, you know, both of us winning helps each other, right? And so, and at the end of the day, I want to see a sister succeed. So, you know, those are some of the ways I would say to get yourself ready to run for office.
That is great advice. Volunteering for a campaign. I had not heard that one yet. I think that's brilliant. So I think that was our last official question that we were going to ask. So we're going to switch to questions from our audience. And Lázaro is asking, can you please let us know where we can volunteer? We have been sharing links to Melba and Luisa's volunteer page, but are there any other ways individuals can volunteer?
Yeah, so thanks again for dropping my my website into the comments. So you can definitely click there and be able to volunteer. And then also you can volunteer on a wider level, again, like with Ruth's List that I mentioned, or with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. You can always go and volunteer with them, just generally with the party, and then they may assign you to a certain candidate, or they may be doing get out to vote efforts that you can take part in. They may be doing some, for instance, the Democratic Party is doing a lot of postcard writing campaigns around getting people out to vote and encouraging them to request their vote by mail ballot. So that's another way to get involved. And also, again, for me, the easiest thing is start with your interests. If there's something you're super passionate about, are you passionate about reproductive rights? Are you passionate about climate change? Are you passionate about education? You know, find the organizations that are aligned with your viewpoints and volunteer with them. And from that, it helps put you in touch with other people who may be running on a platform that you support, or again, would give you support if you decide to run for office. Okay,
perfect. We also had someone else asking in the chat if you normally get notified if there is an issue with your mail-in ballots.
Yes, you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be. I know sometimes things slip through the cracks, things happen, but you're supposed to be notified. And what happens is that you have 7 days from election day to be able to cure your ballot. So that's why I really encourage people to vote by mail or vote early. So that way, if there's a problem, it's not like you're scrambling like, crap, I have 7 days. And that doesn't include the weekend because nobody's at the supervisor of elections office on the weekend. So you've got X number of weekdays. And if you can't get off from work, or if the traffic is crazy, or if you have an emergency, then you're not able to be able to fix it. So that's why I think voting by by mail is so important, and then you can track your ballot, and then if there's a problem, you still have plenty of time to either fix it or have that ballot discarded and then go vote in person, right? So yeah, definitely they're supposed to let you know.
Okay, wonderful. And for this upcoming election on August 18th, is it for Miami-Dade County? Is it for Florida? Can you please give us a little bit of guidance into what area is covered in this election?
Yeah, so August 18th is statewide. And so that's all the primaries statewide. So for instance, you know, Jasmine is on the ballot. Like I mentioned, she's on the ballot for the 18th for state rep. You know, in Orlando, Monique's on the ballot for August 18th. In Broward County, all the candidates for state attorney, they're on the ballot for August 18th. So all of those elections are happening then. And then, of course, we have the November 3rd election.
Okay, wonderful. And Caitlin is asking, what is the most important thing you're currently working towards accomplishing in this next month before primary elections? I guess if both of you can answer that question.
Yeah, right now we are very much, you know, we've been building, foundation. Now it's really, well, we're still very much building and reaching out because, you know, we are trying to contact almost 30,000 voters on a regular basis. And that's a heavy lift. So we are very focused on making sure that everyone is registered to vote by mail if that's what they would like to do, and we're encouraging them to do that for all the reasons previously stated, ensuring that anyone who hasn't heard from us yet does. So we're on the phones, we are phone banking, text banking, and doing a lot of just creative outreach. Because of COVID, we're just trying to really find new ways to meet community where they're at in this socially distanced digital world. And that's really our focus, making sure more and more people hear about our stance and what we would like to see.
Yeah, much the same for me. My big focus right now is fundraising, because at the end of the day, we've got to do mailers, and, you know, all those little mailers that you get in the mailbox for all the candidates. Yeah, that's like 20 grand. So it ain't free, right? So, you know, my big fundraising push right now is to make sure we have funds to be able to do mailers, to be able to do some radio ads. So again, to continue to get the word out there about our race, as well as just engaging with voters. We're going to be doing very robust text banking as well as phone banking. We have volunteers who are, you know, so if you want to volunteer and call some voters around this race, you don't have to live in Dade County to volunteer, since we're all doing things virtually. So, you know, getting the word out there by phone calls, by text messages, doing a ton of Zooms like this, not only for fundraising, but for engaging with voters. So that's the way that I'm able to speak to different clubs and different groups and areas of the county, since we're not having in-person events. So yeah, my focus is raising money and getting the word out.
Wonderful. And I guess just so that we end on this note, is everyone who lives in Miami-Dade County is going to have Melba on their ballot? Is that correct?
Yes, everybody, because even though it's a primary, it's an open primary. It's a weird thing. It's a very weird Florida thing. But since both of us are Democrats, and there's no other Republican, no party affiliated write-in challenger, then the entire county gets to vote in this race, so that everyone is able to have a say on who their state attorney should be. So if you're missing in August, you're going to miss it altogether, right? So if you don't vote in August,
you're missing out. Okay. We definitely have to vote August 18th, guys.
Yes.
And what about you, Luisa? Is everyone, can you tell us what city people will be seeing you on the ballot?
Yes, school boards, there are 9 districts. And so my district runs from Pinecrest and the north side to Florida City, all the way down south to the end of our county.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I think that was the last of our questions. I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're both really busy right now to join us. And sharing all of your insights, and I learned a ton about voting and elections. And I really hope, I want to also thank Grace and Chris, who are helping us behind the scene, sharing links on the chat and monitoring questions. And obviously, I also want to thank all of the attendees who joined us here today. And I really hope you all make it out to vote on August 18th. And if you're not in the state of Florida, then please, I encourage you to find out when is the primary for your state, and so that you can get more involved in elections and voting. And please stay tuned. We will have another webinar for using your influence for social change. And in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you everyone for joining.